Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for May 31st, 2018. On today's episode, we're going to be catching up with a whole bunch of film and television news. This is Slash Film senior writer Ben Pearson, and joining me today is writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
Chris, you wrote a majority of these articles, and because we've been sort of delayed in talking about news because of Memorial Day and our water cooler episode yesterday, we have a ton of news to get to today. So let's kick it off with one of the biggest stories in TV history. That might not be too much of an overstatement. Roseanne has been canceled. The star of the show, Roseanne Barr, tweeted a racist statement, which is like not surprising considering her past. But ABC, the network that ran Roseanne or aired it, finally had enough and decided that they were going to officially cancel the show. It ended its first season, or not its first season, but I guess it's been its revival season. So this is actually the 10th season of the show overall, but the first since it's come back, since the 90s. And ABC had already, decided to give it a second season. It was a huge ratings hit. It, by many metrics, was the most popular show on television, which is like pretty phenomenal. And ABC has finally pulled the plug on this. They released a statement. You guys can read the Roseanne's original tweet at this article in Slash Film. I'm not going to go through all of that stuff, but ABC president said Roseanne's Twitter statement is abhorrent, repugnant, and inconsistent with our values, and we've decided to cancel her show. And even Bob Iger, the CEO of the Walt Disney Company, which owns ABC, decided to chime in, saying there was only one thing to do here, and that was the right thing. So, Chris, what are your thoughts about this?
I mean, so I was a fan of the original Roseanne back, when it aired on, I guess, ABC, and because the original run, it was Roseanne at the time was sort of sane, I guess. I don't know how to explain it, but if you look at old episodes of Roseanne, there's actually like a lot of progressive stuff in it. Like, the whole pitch Roseanne is, they're a blue collar working class family, but the original run, it made a point of saying, these characters contain multitudes, that, they're not stereotypes. And at some point, over the last decade or so, Roseanne lost her mind. I don't know. She became a really terrible person. I mean, and, on one level, I fully support this idea of canceling the show because, what she said was abhorrent. But at the same time, it seems like it's like what took them so long, because she's been saying this sort of stuff for years now. Before they agreed to give her the show, she was still saying stuff like this. And it's like, I don't want to knock it. I don't want to do the whole too little too late thing, but it seems like, they should have took this into account before agreeing to give her a show again.
Yeah, I wonder if they just weren't aware of the extent to which she was, had kind of gone off the deep end, because she's into full-on conspiracy theories, and like she's really responsible for proliferating a lot of the the alt-right conspiracy theories about Donald Trump breaking up child sex rings and all sorts of insane things that are like demonstrably false. So you would think that ABC would have, I don't know, done some digging into the past. It's like anytime somebody is hired for any job, there's like a BuzzFeed article or somebody, dives into their Twitter history and pulls out every terrible thing they've ever said. It seemed like ABC maybe was just blinded by the possibility of earning a ton of really good ratings, which they did for a while. But yeah, I'm sort of right there with you. It seems like too little too late. And but I guess I'm glad ultimately that they sort of made the call. And I guess after the cancellation, reruns of the original series that ran from 1988 to 1997 have been pulled from all sorts of TV networks, Paramount Network, TV Land, CMT. So it seems like this is just going to be scrubbed from history. And I never watched the original Roseanne, but I've heard a lot of people say sort of what you just did. Like the first batch of seasons was, pretty progressive and like legitimately good television. So it's sort of one of those things where it's like, it's unfortunate that we're going to lose quality TV in this, but at a certain point, like there has to be consequences for actions, right? I don't know. I'm glad that we're not living in a world that's completely consequence free. But let's move on to our next article, and that is the Penguin might be the villain of the new Batman movie. Chris, tell us about this one.
Oh yeah, so Justin Kroll, who's a reporter for Variety, he prefaced this by saying, "Take this with a grain of salt," but he added that there's a rumor going around right now that the Penguin will be the villain in Matt Reeves' The Batman, his long awaited solo Batman film, which has gone through several incarnations. I mean, Ben Affleck was originally going to direct it, and then he stepped away from directing, saying the script wasn't right. There's been tons of rumors that Ben Affleck might actually just leave the DCEU before he even makes this film. So we don't really know what is even going on with this, but there's a strong indication that the Penguin will be in this film, so much so that the other half of the story says that if the character doesn't end up in the Batman, he might end up in that Birds of Prey / Harley Quinn movie they're making. So someone at Warner Brothers really wants the Penguin in the DCEU.
So this is one of those things that, like you just said, somebody at WB has sort of a hard-on for this idea, and it seems it's one of those stories that one of those notions that you sort of hear about. Like, I think Kevin Smith told this famous story, you've probably heard it, about John Peters, the producer of who was going to be the producer of a Superman movie that he was going to be working on, he wanted this giant mechanical spider to be in that film, and it ultimately made its way into Wild Wild West instead. It's just like the idea of one person somewhere up the chain getting this idea in their head that, like, yes, this element has to be in this movie. Do you think that it makes sense for the Penguin to be in a Birds of Prey movie? Like, let's assume that he doesn't show up in the Batman. I know that the Penguin and Catwoman shared the screen in Batman Returns, but do you think Harley Quinn and all these female characters, throwing the Penguin in there would be an interesting mix?
The only thing I could think of is some producer said, "Well, a penguin is a bird, so why don't we put him in the Birds of Prey film?" That's the only thing I can think of there. But I don't know what the script for that movie looks like. So I mean, it might work. I really think this comes down to like casting, like if they cast an interesting actor in this part, I think it'll work out. But I don't know what they're gonna do.
What do you think is going on? I mean, this is a larger conversation, I guess, but just based on all the articles that we've been writing over the past few months, what the hell do you think is happening in the world of the DCEU right now? Do you think that there's so many projects that have been announced that sound completely bonkers, and we haven't really seen much movement on them? Do you think, like, which of the many projects that they have in development do you think are the most likely to actually come to fruition one day?
I mean, they'll definitely get this Batman movie off the ground just because Batman is like their bread and butter. He's the character who's always a success for them. I guess they're gonna get that Birds of Prey movie made because that's moving forward, and Margot Robbie seems to be spearheading that really hard. But it really sounds like they're just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. I mean, they have Aquaman coming out later this year, which seems like the tail end of the quote unquote Snyderverse, which is pretty much over at this point. And then there's Shazam next year, which is going to be more comedic, I guess. I don't know. It just seems like they're literally just trying everything until they have a hit on their hands. I mean, the only surefire thing they have right now is Wonder Woman 2. Everyone's going to be excited for that because everyone liked the first Wonder Woman. But beyond that, I don't know.
All right, and one last question. Do you think, based on almost nothing and a lot of the whispers that we've heard that, could be nothing, could be something, do you think, just in your gut, that Ben Affleck is going to come back to play Batman again?
I want to say no, because it seems like he really does not like being in, like, it seems like he thought he was signing up for something completely different, and, everyone by now, everyone has seen that meme where he just looks miserable, and I really think he hasn't enjoyed this experience. But again, if the script turns out well, he might want to stick around. I don't know. He doesn't seem like he has a lot other things going on at the moment, so I don't know.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on into another comic book themed story, and that is that Woody Harrelson has confirmed that he is going to appear in Venom and Venom 2. I don't even think Venom 2 has been officially greenlit yet, but Sony, as many of you probably know, has decided to create an entirely separate Marvel cinematic universe of their own that doesn't really feature Spider-Man, but features a bunch of Spider-Man's supporting characters instead. And Venom is the first movie that is going to be in that new universe. Tom Hardy is starring as Venom. Ruben Fleischer, the director of Zombieland, is directing the movie, and a rumor came out, or a story came out, that Woody Harrelson, this was last year I think, that Woody Harrelson was rumored to, be close to, in talks to joining or something like that. We didn't really know much about his character, but now because he was doing some press for his new movie and Solo, a Star Wars story, he has answered the question. He has confirmed that he is going to be in Venom. He said, I'm in a little fraction of this movie, but I'll be in the next one, So I haven't read that script, but anyways, just rolled the dice, which makes it sound like a very haphazard decision on his part. Like, Woody Harrelson doesn't give a shit what he's doing. He's just like, yeah, sure, why not, whatever. But he is reuniting with Ruben Fleischer, who directed him in Zombieland, so I guess it makes sort of sense that way. We originally heard that Harrelson would be playing a quote-unquote henchman in Venom, and now the idea that he's in a little fraction of this movie but will likely play a much larger role in the second one has me wondering if he's actually going to be playing Carnage, which is a rumor that went around that I think you wrote about a month or two ago. And what do we know about Carnage? What is this character? Do you know?
My bulk of knowledge from Carnage is from the great old video game Maximum Carnage, which I used to play all the time. But from what I understand, he's sort of like Venom. He has the how do you say it?
Symbiote, I think.
Symbiote. What's up with that?
Yeah.
The symbiote costume. But whereas Venom has sort of blossomed into this anti-hero, and he's going to be an anti-hero in the Venom movie, Carnage is a serial killer, so he's just straight up bad news. So I guess he's the anti-Venom, if you will. Although I guess Spider-Man is also the anti-Venom, but they can't have that in this movie.
Right. So let's assume that Woody Harrelson is playing a serial killer named Cletus Cassidy, who is infected with this alien creature, this alien symbiote. Do you think that Woody Harrelson, as a sort of a cracked out comic book villain, is going to lead to an interesting performance?
Yes, I'd actually like to see that. I feel like I don't think Venom as a movie is going to be great, but I'm curious to see it because it looks like it might be interesting in a terrible sort of way, like, oh, this was enjoyable in how dumb it is. But I love the idea of Woody Harrelson just doing whatever he wants as a comic book villain. I'm actually surprised it's taken this long to get him in a comic book movie, because he seems like he would have a lot of fun just going over the top and doing his thing. So
yeah, totally. I think he really pulls off the manic sort of crazy eyes with the best of them, I think. So I'm totally right there. I'm all in for seeing him just completely unhinged as Carnage. And I relish the idea of one day seeing a bunch of behind the scenes photos of Woody Harrelson all decked out in motion capture suits and flashing insane faces and doing all sorts of crazy stuff like that. That seems like I would be pretty entertained by that. So yeah, we don't know when Venom 2 is coming out. We don't even know if Ruben Fleischer is going to be directing the second movie. I'm wondering if that's why he agreed to appear in this film, was it because he may have had a conversation with Fleischer, who plans to direct Venom 2 as well, but we don't even know if the first Venom is going to perform very well at the box office. That movie doesn't come out until October 5th, so I guess we'll have to wait and see on that one. In the meantime, talking about another movie that's sort of been in the works for a while, The Crow remake. This movie has a hell of a history. Chris, tell us the latest about this one.
When I was writing this story up, my mind started to break as I went over the history of this film. So I feel like everyone knows The Crow. It's based on the graphic novel by James O'Barr. It was turned into a film in 1994 by Alex Proyas, and it starred Brandon Lee, who infamously died while making the film due to an accident on set. And since about 2008, Relativity Media, who originally owned it, have been trying to make a remake, and it's gone through several directors. Stephen Norrington, who directed Blade, was going to direct it, and then Juan Carlos Fresnadillo, I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, who directed 28 Weeks Later, was going to direct it. And they kept changing actors too. Bradley Cooper was going to be in it at one point. Mark Wahlberg, Channing Tatum, Ryan Gosling, James McAvoy,
Good God.
Luke Evans. So Luke Evans was the first one to be officially signed on, and then he dropped out almost instantly and was replaced by Jack Houston, who was on Boardwalk Empire, and he was in that terrible Ben-Hur remake. Then Jack Houston left, and they suggested Nicholas Hoult or Jack O'Connell take over. Neither of them signed on. Directors kept changing, and then finally Corin Hardy, who directed this indie horror film, The Hollow, and he's directing the upcoming Conjuring spinoff, The Nun, signed on to direct. And Jason Momoa, who, he's Aquaman and Game of Thrones actor, signed on to play the lead. And, after all the turmoil, all the ups and downs, it sounded like things had finally stabilized, and the film was about 5 weeks away from beginning production, and now both Corin Hardy and Jason Momoa have left the project. So now it has no director, no star, and it's dead again, basically. And they should probably give it up at this point, but I know they won't. I know in a month's time we're going to hear the new director and new actor, and then like 2 months later they're going to drop out. This will go on forever.
This might end up being one of the most expensive movies ever made just because of how much money has been pumped into it in the development stages. Like, I think I remember hearing something about how Superman Returns was way more expensive than than it sort of looked, because that movie was in the works for so long and so many different people took a pass at the script and were attached over the years. And I think Tim Burton was attached to direct a version, and all of that money was just sort of funneled into the final production budget of this movie, which seems sort of unfair to the people who finally came on at the last minute to figure this thing out. But God, what a nightmare this sounds like. And I think people were making jokes about The Crow being cursed, one or two entries into this rotating door of talent coming around, and now we're like, I don't know, 10 instances deep into that, where you've just listed all these people who have been involved with this project over the years. Do you think this ever is going to get made, or do you think they really will just sort of pack it up?
I'm sure they'll get it made sooner or later. They really should pack it up, because I don't think anyone wants a new Crow at this point, but they seem so dead set on making this happen. And I also feel like there's like a sort of like pride thing where it's like, God damn it, we've been trying so long, we're going to get this made no matter what. And it'll come out and it'll bomb, and then they'll move on.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so let's talk about Top Gun 2. Speaking of movies that I guess I never expected to finally come out, Top Gun 2 is one of those that's been in discussions for a long, long time, and Tom Cruise, the star of the first movie, who's coming back to reprise his role as Maverick in the sequel, has shared a photo of himself holding his old fighter pilot helmet that says Maverick on the back, with the text "Feel the Need" over the top of it. So he posted this image on Twitter with the hashtag #Day1 of production. So this movie is happening. I think at one point it was called Top Gun: Maverick, but we're not sure what the official title is yet. We know it's being directed by Joseph Kosinski, who is the filmmaker who directed Tom Cruise in a sci-fi film called Oblivion a few years ago. Kosinski is the guy who directed Tron Legacy. That was his first film. And based on Tron Legacy and Oblivion, he's one of those guys that has a really interesting visual knack, but doesn't know really how to wrangle a story together in a satisfying way, based on my experience with his films. I think he also directed a firefighter movie that came out either earlier this year or last year. I don't remember the name of it, but I'm sure you know the one I'm talking about. Miles Teller is in it. I think Josh Brolin is in it as well. But so Top Gun Maverick, or Top Gun 2, this thing, it looks like it's actually finally happening. Chris, are you interested in this? What do you think about the first Top Gun, and are you interested in a sequel?
So here's where I confess I've never seen the original Top Gun.
Wow.
That's one of those movies I've never seen. So I can't say I'm chomping at the bit for a sequel. But I like Tom Cruise, despite his sometimes questionable interviews. I like Tom Cruise. He's one of those, consummate entertainers. He'll do whatever it takes to make his movies. So at the very least, I'm looking forward to stories about what insane, dangerous stunts he does for this film. Like I'm sure he'll literally eject himself from a plane and fly in. He'll do all the crazy shit that he needs to do to get this movie made.
Yeah, he really seems to have entered that phase in his career where it's almost, you were talking about the pride before of like a Hollywood studios trying to just, will something into existence. It seems like Tom Cruise has really taken pride in becoming that guy who does all these crazy stunts for real. So regardless of the franchise, it seems like I mean, even like Rock of Ages, like he did his own singing for that movie where he plays like this hair metal guy from like a movie in 2012. So I think he's definitely seems like he's taking pride in being that guy who does these stunts. And I mean, I really, really like the first Top Gun. I think it's cheesy, but in a way that makes it really easy to love anyway. I would be really interested to hear what you think about it because I grew up with that movie, so I sort of have like a weird relationship where I probably can't look at it as objectively as somebody who's coming to it fresh. So if you get a chance to check that out sometime in the next, whatever, a couple months, check back in maybe on, what we've been watching section or something and let us know what you think about that. That would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I have to get around to seeing it at this point.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so Sesame Street and the Happy Time Murders are both projects that involve Muppets or puppet creatures, and there's been this back and forth lawsuit with them over the past week. Can you run down the history of this and how this whole thing wrapped up?
Yeah, so the Happy Time Murders, it's a film directed by Brian Henson, who is the son of Jim Henson, who of course created the Muppets. And it's a dirty puppet movie basically. It's like Who Framed Roger Rabbit with the F word and puppets instead of cartoons. So there's it's a murder mystery with puppets and humans, and it's very raunchy. And it's poking fun of the whole Muppet universe, I guess you could say. And the film has a tagline which personally I think is a terrible tagline, but that's neither here nor there. And it's no Sesame, all street. And apparently the makers of Sesame Street, Sesame Workshop, were very unhappy about this. They basically said, this was tarnishing the Sesame Street brand. It was associating Sesame Street with this raunchy material. And so they filed a lawsuit to basically, try and stop the film from using this tagline and changing its marketing. And if you were hoping for a long drawn out court case here, you're not going to get it because almost immediately after filing this, I think we learned about this on Friday, and yesterday we learned that a judge has already ruled in favor of the Happy Time Murders, and the judge said, I'm not going to read his exact quote, but he basically boiled it down to saying that Sesame Workshop really didn't even have a case here, so it wasn't worth going any further. So there you have it. The Happy Time Murders has won.
I thought it was kind of strange that Sesame Street went so hard after this because it's not like they have a copyright on the words Sesame and Street separated from one another. I feel like if they used, because there's a period in that, it's two sentences with the tagline, all Sesame, no Street, or whatever, the other way around, I guess. It seems like, I don't know, it always seemed like sort of a flimsy thing to me, but I guess I can kind of understand where they're coming from, like not wanting people to be confused with with the branding there. I mean, do you think that they thought this through at all? Do you think this was like a conspiracy to just get the Happy Time Murders some more publicity? I don't know. What do you think?
I really don't know. It's very, I mean, I don't want to besmirch Sesame Street because they're an institution and they've done such great things for, the world in general, but it does seem like this whole lawsuit was a little frivolous, and they easily could have like issued a statement saying they didn't like it without trying to sue. Like it just seems like it's unnecessary to get legal about this.
Yeah, and it's especially strange considering, like you mentioned, Brian Henson, the director and I think maybe co-writer of the script. Did he write it? Did you say that? I don't remember if he's
he did write it.
Okay, yeah. So director Brian Henson, who's the son of Jim Henson, like you said, that Sesame Street is attacking him, and the Jim Henson Company created the Muppets and puppet characters that appear on Sesame Street. And I thought it was kind of strange that these that the Happy Time Murders was sort of like under fire from an organization that was so close to them. But doing a little bit more research, the Sesame Workshop that you've mentioned is the rights holder to Sesame Street, but they're a separate nonprofit company that just produces the show Sesame Street. So it's not actually like the same company or like a subsidiary or anything like that. So just in case anybody was confused like I was, I finally had to do some digging to figure that out. But let's move on to our next item, man. We have so much news to talk about today. This is one of the more bizarre items that we've been sort of tracking over the past couple days. A Sonic the Hedgehog movie is in the works. Tell us about this. I'm sorry I'm making you do this.
I feel like everyone knows Sonic the Hedgehog, the classic Sega game about a hedgehog who runs around collecting rings and fighting a mad scientist. It is what it is. For some reason, Paramount wants to turn that premise into a film. And they've cast a lead, and that lead is James Marsden from Westworld. He's on Westworld right now, and he's not actually playing Sonic the Hedgehog. None of the stories report who he's playing. There was a rumor floating around that the character is a cop who helps Sonic the Hedgehog, but that has not been confirmed by anyone, so I don't really want to say that's the plot, but I honestly, I don't know what the hell this movie's going to be. I don't know who James Marsden is playing. I don't know why the Sonic the Hedgehog movie needs a human character. For some reason, this movie is being made as a combination live-action animation film, when really this should really just probably be all CGI, but I guess Paramount has a vision for this, and they're sticking with it.
It seems like they're trying to chase, like, the... what is that? The Smurfs, or the Alvin and the Chipmunks or something, trying to put it in that mold. And it's like, this movie, or this character rather, Sonic the Hedgehog, was popular on Sega video game systems that I guarantee you a huge percentage of the target audience to this movie has never even laid eyes on that console before. Like, the name recognition of this character I don't think is as pervasive as they think it is. So the approach, this half live action, half animation hybrid approach, seems like a really strange choice to me. And it's also like Tim Miller, the guy who directed Deadpool, is executive producing this, so I'm so automatically not as interested with his involvement, because I don't like the first Deadpool and I don't think he's a particularly great director. So I can't believe that this is happening. I think this is one of those ideas that a studio has been kicking around for years and years, but this is one that I'm honestly shocked that it's happening this late in the game. I mean, the release date for this is November 15th, 2019. This movie is going to come out so, I feel like the last person who legitimately played Sonic the Hedgehog on a Sega console is going to be I don't know, 25 or something by the time this movie hits theaters. I don't know. This is a weird one to me. I don't know. Chris, I'm gonna blow past this. I'm not even gonna make you think about this anymore.
That's fine. That's fine.
So let's talk a little bit about Lock and Key. I'm interested. This is based on a comic series, and a TV adaptation has been in the works for a long time. Have you read the comic?
I haven't. I do like Joe Hill's writing. He is of course the son of Stephen King, and I like a lot of Joe Hill's short stories, but I've never read this comic.
Okay, yeah, I have not either, but I've written so many stories about Lock and Key over the years, becoming a potential TV adaptation, that I feel like I know the story pretty well. So it's a comic that is sort of a horror fantasy series that tracks three siblings who, along with their mother, move into their old family home in Maine after the murder of their father, and they discover that something sinister is at work there. It's this sort of classic haunted house thing, and there's a set of keys that can open doors into different dimensions. There's a demon there that will stop at nothing to obtain those keys. So it sounds like a pretty cool concept, and like I said, I've never actually gotten around to reading the comic myself, but I need to remedy that immediately. But Lock and Key has sort of a troubled development history. The Fox network developed it as a pilot in 2011, and Mark Romanek, the filmmaker behind 1 Hour Photo and Never Let Me Go, directed a pilot that actually screened for audiences at Comic-Con that year, but Fox ended up passing on the pilot, and then they were talking about making it into a movie instead of a TV show. And then it's one of those things that's just it's never fully died. It hasn't had much movement on it for a long time, but it's always sort of like bubbling up every once in a while and remaining a possibility. So the latest is that Netflix has neared is pretty close to picking it up for a series, or to a series order from showrunner Carlton Cuse, who's one of the guys behind Lost. And Andy Muschietti, the director of the recent It movie, is going to be an executive producer on it. He, I guess, directed a pilot for Hulu, and Hulu watched that pilot and ended up passing on the show. So they're going to recast everything and put a new director on it, but Muschietti is still going to be credited as an executive producer on this version whenever it eventually goes to Netflix. So that's the long, I guess, abbreviated history. There's more in there as well, and you can read more about this and all the other stories that we talked about at Slash Film. So just for people who are big Lock and Key comic book fans who have been crossing their fingers for years and years that this is actually going to happen, it sounds like it's closer than ever to actually happening. So it seems like Netflix is probably going to be the final home for this thing. So this next story made me crack up when the news first broke. Tell us what Hollywood has decided to make a movie of next, Chris.
Creepy crawlers.
I mean, this entire episode, I feel like, is just the two of us just like shaking our heads at all these news items. Like, what the hell is going on?
I should also add that this is also a Paramount movie, like Sonic the Hedgehog. So Paramount is they're on a roll this week. But so Creepy Crawlers, as you may remember, it was basically an easy bake oven geared towards people who like bugs. It's a little oven that you make. It's this substance called plastic goop, and you put it into molds, and it creates these fake bugs and monsters and stuff like that. And so for some reason, Paramount really wants to turn this into a movie. There's no writer or director yet. There's no word what this will even be about, but they're making it a movie. I mean, if I had to guess, it's going to be something like Jumanji, where kids find an old creepy crawlers machine and it comes to life and makes real monsters. But that's just that's off the top of my head. Maybe it'll be a much smarter film than that. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I was this is another thing just like Sonic, where it's like the name recognition for this. I mean, I haven't even thought about creepy crawlers since the mid 90s or something, like when I was growing up and those commercials were omnipresent on TV. And looking at your article, there was a Creepy Crawlers TV show? I had no idea about this. Did you know about that beforehand?
I did not. I found that out while researching this, and it blew my mind because I had no idea it existed. But apparently, yeah, there was a TV show, and it actually ran for a few years. It ran from 1994 to 1996, so there were enough storylines in the Creepy Crawlers TV show to stretch it out over a period of years.
Wow. I mean, honestly, I don't know if there's any more to say about that. A Creepy Crawlers movie, man, that is... it's really... I mean, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel at this point. So let's talk about the Spawn reboot. We're coming into the home stretch here, Chris. Tell us about who has been cast to star in the new Spawn movie.
Jamie Foxx will play Spawn in the new Spawn reboot from Todd McFarlane, who is the creator of Spawn, the comics. Spawn is yet another 90s project. It's like 90s week here. Spawn is another 90s project. It started out as a comic book back in the 90s when extreme anti-heroes were all the rage in comics. It inspired a very awful 1997 film, and it also inspired a surprisingly good HBO animated series, which was very dark and disturbing, and I actually liked that. And for years, Todd McFarlane has been talking about making a reboot, getting this project back off the ground again. And for a while, it kind of seemed like he was just saying that. It just seemed like something he kept saying without any actual movement. And eventually, he struck up a deal with Jason Blum at Blumhouse, but even then, it seemed like, this will never happen. But now he's cast Jamie Foxx in the lead, so it seems like this project is finally moving forward, and it's going to be a lot different than the 1997 film. In a lot of ways, in several interviews, Todd McFarlane has actually compared this to Jaws, which is just bizarre to me, but he's saying it's going to be a movie like Jaws where Spawn is sort of like the shark in Jaws in that you don't see him all the time. He pops up as this sort of force of nature, and apparently the character is going to be dialogue free, which is also kind of weird because why cast someone like Jamie Foxx if he's not going to have any dialogue? But
Yeah, that's the big question. Why the hell would they do that? That makes zero sense to me.
A part of me feels like there's no way they're going to stick with that. That they're going to, someone somewhere, like Jason Blum or someone's going to say you have to give him some lines because this isn't going to work. But I guess we'll see. I mean, the idea of this weird, stripped down movie inspired by Spawn is kind of interesting. I mean, I'm more interested in that than anything resembling the 1997 film. So I'm curious to see what happens. But Todd McFarlane isn't really a filmmaker. It's kind of weird to me that he's also directing this. Like, I'd feel a lot better if they handed this off to an established director, but we all have to start somewhere. So maybe he's got a secret masterpiece hiding somewhere in him.
Yeah, and like I think Todd McFarlane has never even directed like a commercial or anything before. Like he's completely spent his career developing comics and toys and stuff like that. So the idea that he would come in and be able to lock down this opportunity for himself to direct is like one of those. I guess if the movie turns out well, I'm sure it'll turn into like one of those narratives where it's like, oh, he pulled himself up by his bootstraps and and managed to get his dream on the screen. But from the outside looking in, it's like you're gonna give somebody $10 million who's never really like held a camera to direct a movie like this. But I guess the whole Blumhouse model is small budgets and comparatively small risks. And I guess with a $10 million budget, Jamie Foxx probably isn't going to be taking a huge chunk of that. So maybe Jamie Foxx is just a big Spawn fan, and that's why he ended up taking this role, even if it ends up not having a ton of dialogue. I don't know. There's a lot of question marks about this movie for me, but yeah, like you mentioned, it's got to be better than the thing that came out in 1997. So, all right. So after all of these stories that have made us roll our eyes back into our skulls, I wanted to finally end with a bit of a palate cleanser and talk about an Orson Welles movie. So, Chris, tell us about Orson Welles' final film and how we're actually going to get to see this thing.
Yeah, so Orson Welles, his last film was a movie called The Other Side of the Wind, and he started making it in 1970, and around 1976, he sort of ran out of the budget for it. He was unable to finish it, and he spent a long time trying to raise the funds to finish it. At the time, he said it was about 96% complete, and he just needed a little bit more money to get it done, and he was just never able to do it. He died in 1985, I think, and the film just sat unmade. And Frank Marshall, who's a writer and a filmmaker and a producer, has been trying for years to finish the film, and he actually struck a deal with Netflix to get it done. And, of course, everyone knows Netflix doesn't really like theatrical releases, and Netflix had planned to screen The Other Side of the Wind at this year's Cannes Film Festival, but then there was a big hubbub where Cannes and Netflix got into this feud because Cannes doesn't consider Netflix to be real cinema, I guess, specifically because they don't screen their movies in theaters. And as a result, Netflix pulled all their movies out of Cannes, and there was this whole thing. And but now it looks like they're reconsidering things ever so slightly, and Frank Marshall confirmed on Twitter that they are planning we don't know the extent of it yet, but they are planning some sort of theatrical release for the film. I'm sure it'll still appear on the streaming platform, but they're also going to roll it out in a few theaters. So I'm sure cinephiles who are dying to see this and hate the idea of streaming it will have that to look forward to.
Yeah, and I just watched Orson Welles' Citizen Kane I probably have seen that movie. Maybe this might have been like my third time seeing it. And hot take, that movie is really good. I don't know when the last time you saw Citizen Kane was, Chris, but I was very, very impressed rewatching it.
It's so good. I mean, that's one of those movies that it gets this sort of like cliched sort of hype where it's like, oh, everyone says Citizen Kane is a great movie, blah, blah, blah. But it really is just an amazing movie, especially that was, Orson Welles' debut film. And he innovated techniques in that film that filmmakers are still using today. And, to the idea of, seeing, his final unfinished film, to finally be finished is really cool. And especially because there's a lot of great actors. I mean, like John Huston is in this, Dennis Hopper is in this, and these are actors who have all died. And the idea of seeing new performances from them is really cool.
And I also really enjoy movies about movie making, and it seems like this is one of those. It falls into that category. It's described as a satire of Hollywood, and it tracks the last days of a film director who's struggling to get his movie made, and the movie within the movie is also called The Other Side of the Wind. So this could, I mean, I don't want to like overhype something that has that has not been really seen by anyone other than the people who are working on it. But I feel like, just like you mentioned, the Houston and the acting talent involved, plus this being freaking Orson Welles' movie, and Peter Bogdanovich and Frank Marshall, all these people, and the idea of it being a Hollywood satire, this could, I mean, just by the mere fact that it exists, put it into the pretty near the top of the list of those kinds of great movies about making movies.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited about this.
All right, so I think that's finally going to bring us to the end of this episode. Mercifully, I know we've talked about a lot of garbage news on today's episode, so I apologize for that. But hey, we can only deal with what Hollywood throws at us. So you can find more about all of these stories that we mentioned on today's show at slashfilm.com, and linked in the show notes of this episode. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find at slashfilm.com. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send your feedback, questions, comments, and concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com, and leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends and spread the word any way you can. And before we sign off, Chris, where can people find more of your work online this week?
I am, of course, at slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at cevangelista413.
You can find me at slashfilm.com as well. I'm on Twitter at Ben Pears. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.